Hello. Can you guys hear me now? Can you guys hear me? Show of hands. Excellent. So welcome to the panel. This is Monetizing Content and Data. My name is Pete Rizzo, editor for CoinDesk. Thanks everybody for coming, and thanks for sticking out this afternoon. So I guess to begin, I'm going to introduce the panelists here, and then I'm going to kind of talk a little bit about why monetizing content and data is something that's of interest to CoinDesk as a media outlet, and how that fits with our business model and strategy, and sort of how we're thinking about blockchain. So to my right, we have Ryan X. Charles, former cryptocurrency engineer at Reddit and the founder of Yours. Maybe you want to give a quick introduction to Yours?
Sure. So Yours is like Medium with a paywall. You can create an article similar to Medium, so you can have embedded content, put videos, images in there, things of that sort. And the one thing that seems to be lacking on the internet is, why not just have like a paywall in there? Something where, ordinary people on the internet can just sort of start monetizing their content in the simplest way. So the authors put in a paywall at a location and price of their choosing. Yeah, that's it.
To his right, we have Josh Metnick, the CEO of Navier and the former CTO at the Chicago Sun-Times. So Josh actually did the first large-scale Bitcoin paywall test at the Sun-Times. Maybe you want to talk a little bit about that in your interest. Yeah.
About the paywall?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Sure. So sometimes I wanted to block down the entire site for a month. That was what I took to editorial, that you couldn't access the site for a month unless you went through a Bitcoin paywall. I got negotiated down to 24 hours, and they made me put a free tweet wall in there, and then an X in the upper right-hand box where you could skip the paywall entirely. So we had, I'll cut this short, we had 78,000 visitors come to this site in those 24 hours. We had about 715 voluntarily paid Bitcoin. This was early 2014. And
very
it was
early there.
Yeah, it was the highest converting paywall in the history of the Sun-Times. Why they didn't go forward with it is, it's a conversation for another time.
Yeah. To my left here, we have Brandon Ike, CEO of web browser developer Brave Software, which is, I think, working on a similar issue, but more on the internet level or browser level. Yeah.
So Brave's a browser that's 3 to 6 times faster on Android, we've measured lately, and 3 to 7 times faster on iOS, at least twice as fast on laptop, desktop, because we block trackers and ads. But our early adopters said, can we give back? So we put Bitcoin in so you can automatically, privately micro-donate to your top sites. You can pin donations now. And we're doing a token launch to remonetize users and include them in the ad revenue if they opt into private ads.
To his left, we have Lily Liu, the CFO at 21.co. Maybe you want to talk a little bit about 21 Lists and sort of the work you're doing there with attention monetization.
Sure. So 21 is a paid inbox. You can go to the 21 site, claim a username, and that's a site that anyone can go to basically send you a paid message. And so what it's really good for is people who don't know you, instead of trying to mine your email somewhere off the internet, they can just pay to contact you, signal importance that way. And what we've done is we've sort of aggregated people into a wide variety of lists. So you can use those lists if you're doing something like sales, recruiting, basically any sort of business function, bringing you to prospect, qualify, and sort of try to build connections. So, yeah.
All right, so going back to the thesis of this panel and why we wanted to put this together for consensus this year is, as someone who writes about blockchain technology all the time, as a company that thinks about blockchain technology all the time, we began to kind of look for areas where it might be of interest to CoinDesk. So, we have a partnership with Brave, where you can download the Brave browser right on our site and give micro donations for content. I've worked with Josh on some ideas for content monetization that way, and I think it's important to kind of vocalize the reason for that. And I think the easiest place to start is that when you get down to it, a media outlet is kind of a trusted third party. And it's a network of a bunch of people who each want to do different things. So for example, a writer may want to write about Bitcoin or blockchain, and that's why they might engage with CoinDesk. An advertiser might want to reach a reader, and that's why they might engage with CoinDesk. And then the reader might want to consume that content, and they might not want to engage with the advertiser at all, or they might want better content from that advertiser. So it's sort of an evolution of thought to think about media outlets as a trusted network, and content and attention delivery platforms on the internet as a form of trusted third party. So I guess sort of the common theme here is it seems we're talking about the economics of the internet and how that works. I guess I would kind of throw it over to you, Ryan.
Sure.
How are you looking at the economics of the internet? Is that where you see yours fitting in?
Yeah, let me give a sort of a big picture view from my point of view here. So, the internet was commercialized in the 90s for a lot of reasons. So there is this famous within the space anyway. There's I think it's HTTP error code 402, payment required. The people that invented the web knew that this is want to be monetized somehow, and the obvious way to do this is just by making a payment. For various reasons, this wasn't really possible. I mean, it took a long time, even before PayPal existed. Long time meaning several years, something like 99 or thereabouts. So the internet ended up being monetized primarily through advertising, and then also a sort of a strong subscription component. We sort of hold the conviction that, well, no, micropayments actually are very useful. And the reason why micropayments weren't on the internet in the 90s or the 2000s was primarily for technical and legal reasons, both of which can be solved today. So our approach is there's this giant missing piece of the monetization puzzle, just micropayments, just making a small payment for a piece of content that really just wasn't possible until now, and so that's what we're exploring.
So Josh, why did you fight at the Sun-Times so hard for Bitcoin as a micropayments tool? Was it because you didn't like advertisers? As a user, you didn't like that experience? Or was there some thesis about blockchain and sort of how internet economy? Or maybe you can just explain.
So I had this that Einsteinian definition of insanity. I keep trying the same thing, over and over and over and hoping for a different result, which, in my opinion, pretty much sums up pretty much every major newspaper, except for the top, 2 or 3. They just keep trying the same monetization techniques, over and over and over, and it's not working. I looked at the market cap of Pepe Cash today, and it's worth 3 times the amount that the Sun-Times sold for, along with 58 of its publications. It sold for $5 million plus, some assumed liabilities. The Sun-Times and 58 regional publications. So, my kind of high-level thinking was what they're doing isn't working. It happened to intersect with just this disease, that we get, that I caught in June 2013, and I was spending 8-10 hours of my sometimes time learning about Bitcoin, and so I just thought it'd be an interesting monetization, tactic because everything else was failing.
And specifically the advertising component that was failing? Or?
Well, the revenue model. I mean, the revenue model as a whole. Subscriptions, advertising. Advertising. They're getting crushed by. It's pretty common knowledge. I mean, classified ads were the revenue and profit driver for newspapers for 80 or 90 years, and the combination of Craigslist, eBay, Facebook, Google. I mean, it's. Can I bring my prop that I?
You brought a prop?
I brought a prop.
Sure.
It's a print prop. This
you have prop permission, I guess.
Thanks. I mean, I couldn't have timed this. I mean, this just came out a few days ago, and it's actually it's the Sun-Times the other day, and it's extremely thin. It's a letter from the editor asking the readers if anybody wants to buy the paper.
Wow.
Right, and you're not willing to experiment with it. I mean, they were willing to experiment for 24 hours, and it worked, but they didn't want to go forward. So maybe Bitcoin wasn't the answer, but it was just trying something else.
I guess, Brendan, I'd be curious. So it seems like you've thought a lot about how money moves on the internet. It's not just a media problem per se, but we do have this bad way that value seems to move on the internet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a big hype around data now, and your data, and you're seeing a bunch of data management platforms get bought, and you're seeing the cat set among the pigeons whenever this happens. Like Merkle got bought by Dentsu Aegis, and suddenly all these publishers working with Merkle are like, where's my data? And so the publishers are battening down their hatches, but data is funny. It's not a commodity like pork bellies or sweet light crude. It's contextual, and if you get it down to the individual person, you're probably talking about PII. There's a lot of seasonality in it that could be valuable. You don't want to give it away. So a lot of this ID syncing in ad tech is transactional, and it's taking a lot of money out of the system. Right now, the only beneficiaries seem to be Google and Facebook. Everybody else is running for the exits, and it's not good for the publishers. It's taking out the middle of the revenue.
I think it's interesting about Brave because so when I gave the example about sort of the three primary colors of media having the readers, the creators, and the advertisers, there's actually a few more players in that value chain because there are things like browsers. Maybe you can talk a little bit about the tools that kind of allow those people to interact today.
Yeah, browsers have been a passive agent that either is like a thin postmodern window frame like Chrome. It lets that beautiful Google website shine through, and it doesn't do anything for you in particular. It's not going to block ads or trackers. It may do some anti-phishing, sort of blacklisting of sites at most. Brave takes a more active view because that browser, you're trusting it. It runs on your device. It has access to all your data, your entire intent stream. I was talking to a guy with a startup that can recognize Karate Kid gestures just from the accelerometer in your phone. So, convolutional neural nets, recurrent neural nets. There's a lot of valuable data you trust your device with. The browser has to be on your side, otherwise it's going to be on somebody else's side and you're the chump. So I think the browser is either a passive agent, which means you're the chump, or it's something that you actually can use to take charge of your digital life.
So I guess, Lily, I'd go back to that. 21 Lists is a product. How does it fit with the consumers, creators, advertising? It seems that, and I guess maybe you can tell us how you looked at data sharing on the internet and came up with that product.
We resonate with a lot of the things that you're saying about yours and sort of the original inspiration, which is that the existing monetization tools we have for the internet have not sort of lived up to the original aspirations 20 years ago, for 2 errors and sort of payment required. And maybe one of those reasons is because we're sort of taking these payment rails of the physical world, which are all sort of based around buying physical goods over $1 in value, right? And so it's sort of $1 and above transactions, which are also fairly slow transactions between humans. And we've taken those payment rails and tried to map them onto the internet, when actually the core activity and the core sort of actor on the internet is basically a machine transmitting an API call, which has to happen really fast, and it's worth about $0.01, right? And so what's happening right now is, I would argue that the internet is dramatically under-monetized because the major counterparty of the internet doesn't have credit cards, can't get past a paywall, and therefore can't participate in the internet. And that's something that digital currency can finally resolve. And so that's sort of the longer-term vision that we see. And that's sort of autonomous payments between machines, human-to-machine marketplaces, and that is sort of a big world to think about. But before we get there, you've got to get 1 billion people with a little bit of digital currency. Today we're all amongst this sort of rarefied group of maybe 15 million people with relatively a lot of Bitcoin. And with that, you don't really have those network effects and those closed-loop economies that allow people to actually transact sort of natively with digital currency and to monetize the digital economy. And so essentially what we have today is you have a situation where, if you imagine a physical world where you only had $100 bills to pay for anything, what would you do? I'd never be able to buy a bottle of water, right? I would subscribe to water. I would pool water with all of my friends. I would watch ads about water, and that's exactly what happens on the internet, where we're paying with our attention, and as sort of all consumers and readers and voracious ones on the internet, we're all paying for that as our form of micropayment. But what if we could instead actually be paid and also pay with micropayments on the internet? So that's sort of abstractly what our longer term sort of aspirations are. And sort of very near term, very concretely, we're using micropayments as a way of not just incentivizing attention on the internet, but actually by action, right? So instead of sort of relying on clicks and then eyeballs as being the only thing you can really buy en masse on the internet, now I can actually pay someone to respond to an email. I can pay someone to maybe send an email on my behalf to someone else. I can pay someone to maybe even deploy a node, right? All sorts of sort of micro actions where it's really about buying a couple of minutes of people's time in sort of service of also building this greater digital web and digital currency.
Can you talk a little bit more? I know we talked backstage about social media outlets were sort of an inspiration for 21 Lists, and we had discussed how they're sort of trusted content providers or trusted aggregators of information or data. How did you look at that model? Was that the inspiration for something like 21 Lists?
Yeah, well, the inspiration for 21 Lists is partially from that, but then also just noticing in so many different business processes, there's a common process you go through, which is you find a list of people you want to contact. Most of them you don't know, and then you either try to get warm interest to them, which doesn't really scale because you're asking for favors from your friends, or you do cold emails, which works about 5% of the time, or you do a LinkedIn email, which is somewhere between 5 and 10% of the time. So it's a really laborious effort we all go through, whether you're doing sales, recruiting, research, marketing, whatever it might be, right? So what if, and the sort of missing part of that equation as we saw it is that the end user, the end participant, is asking to do work but not being compensated, right? You do email and Google makes money. You reply to messages on LinkedIn and LinkedIn is getting paid, but you're the one doing the work. So if you can actually share in the profits, then now it's much more sort of, I don't want to say fairer game, but it's a game that everyone's a little bit more excited to participate in, right?
Yeah. I want to turn the conversation a little bit towards micropayments because that does seem to be a common theme here. In order to get content and data to be better monetized, we need micropayments, which means that we need an infrastructure for that. And I think what we're finding, I guess, and I think Brian can speak to this, is that some of the existing blockchains we have, while the original assumption was that micropayments might work really well in those areas, we're finding that as blockchains get larger, as more people want to use them, as the communities have more disagreement about the path forward, that this isn't necessarily the case. So I guess, Ryan, you just moved over to Litecoin. We're planning to launch the solution on Bitcoin. You're still confident that blockchains are going to be able to deliver micropayments?
Absolutely. So yeah, let me give a bit of a background and story here. So I've been in Bitcoin since 2011. I've been a sort of a long time, early adopter, so to speak, of Bitcoin. Our company is very Bitcoin friendly. For the past, 14 or so months that my co-founder and I have been working together, everything was based on Bitcoin. What we ended up doing about a little over a year ago, shortly after we started the company, we realized that on-chain Bitcoin transactions were too expensive and we needed something off-chain. So we spent basically an entire year developing a layer 2 solution for Bitcoin. We have the only currently working routed micropayment system on Bitcoin. It's similar to the Lightning Network for the more sophisticated people in the audience. It works today on Bitcoin. We're not dependent on segregated witness. We should be famous. We're not as famous as I think we deserve, but we do actually have this working on Bitcoin today. The problem, however, is that even with an L2 system on Bitcoin, even with genuine micropayments when you're in the system, you still have to onboard and offboard to and from the system. So just getting a user onto the system costs 2, maybe 3 Bitcoin transactions, depending on how you run the numbers. Bitcoin transactions today I haven't even checked it today, but they increase daily, are like at least $1.50 per transaction. We've run the numbers for our system. If we use Bitcoin today, it would cost about $5 to onboard a user. That's extremely expensive when we're talking that's just the fees on Bitcoin. It doesn't include any of the other expenses of our business. So we basically, and all of this is sort of accelerated in 2017. That is to say, the rising costs for on-chain transactions on Bitcoin. So we went shopping for a coin. We looked at the list of popular altcoins, and we're like, okay, well, we could use Ethereum because Ethereum is very popular, but it's completely technically different from Bitcoin. So we can't just suddenly switch from Bitcoin to Litecoin, from Bitcoin to Ethereum. Well, we looked at Litecoin, and Litecoin is almost exactly the same as Bitcoin. It's a little bit smaller, it's a little bit less widely used, but because it's technically almost equivalent to Bitcoin, we can pivot our infrastructure instantly to Litecoin. It took maybe a couple days to switch everything for various reasons. I mean, it could have been almost instant, but it took a couple days. So we switched to Litecoin because the on-chain fees are only like 5 cents or something. So onboarding a user costs maybe 10, maybe 15 cents. And because there is a lot more info, I'll skip on technical reasons here, but Litecoin has a lot of room to grow. It doesn't fundamentally solve the problem either. Litecoin is ultimately going to have the same problem that Bitcoin has today. But in any case, for the next, let's say, year, we'll be okay on Litecoin, and we'll defer what we're going to do when Litecoin has this problem for when that happens.
So it seems like you still have, I guess, how do we know that with certainty that a blockchain will work out for micropayments?
Well, if one blockchain doesn't work out, there are many. I mean, there's no reason why we have to use just one. So cryptocurrency, sort of as a general field, allows for micropayments. I mean, all we'd have to do is, imagine one of them doesn't work for us. What we do is we take Litecoin, we fork Litecoin, we're already using it. All of our users keep their money. We just increase the block size 100-fold. Now we get cheap transactions. Maybe it turns off some of the Litecoin users, but it doesn't matter because our users are happy. So that's what we would do. So long term, there are crystal clear answers to all this. Just raise the block size. It's not that hard. So No, that's what we would end up doing is forking it and using our own. So like I'm confident there's an answer here. We'd rather not, but there's definitely an answer. I mean, technically it's not that hard.
Brendan, I was wondering if you could talk about your new token, basic attention token.
Mm-hmm.
Did you look at some of these problems, and then why did you eventually end up? So you did an ERC20 token, if I'm correct, which is a token on top of the Ethereum blockchain. I think the difference here I want to just highlight is that Litecoin is still an underlying blockchain. Here we have a token on top of a blockchain network that almost works as an internal app coin. And I think there's kind of an interesting difference here that maybe we can talk about a little bit. So how did you end up with that as the right solution?
Sure. We started with Bitcoin, and we have Bitcoin in Brave. On the laptop, desktop browser, you can go to the preferences, and you'll find something other browsers don't have, which is a payments panel. You can fund your wallet, currently using Coinbase in the US. You have to have Bitcoin otherwise in other regions. There are a lot of user friction problems here. Most users don't have Bitcoin and won't get it. They think it's Silk Road. They're scared of it. So we're actually working with Stripe to do a very clean way to get people to fund their wallets. The idea for this offering in Brave that's already in beta is to support micro donations. We're not counting on this to fund the whole web, but some of our early users actually said, can I put some money in and spread it across my top sites anonymously and automatically? So you can't bother people with micropayments. It has to be automated. So we put a Chartbeats sort of viewability analytics in the browser. All browsers have kind of history mechanism already. And it's purely private on device. At the end of a 30-day uptime period, if you funded your wallet, the pro rata share among the sites you like goes to those sites. You can pin sites now if you want to do a Patreon-style tithing, whether you visit the site or not. You can send 10% of your monthly budget to Twitch or Wikipedia. We did that all with Bitcoin. And we still have this Stripe integration ahead of us. It's coming up fast. It will help because a lot of users just cannot deal with Bitcoin. And we're dealing with browser users here, just average lead users, I should say, maybe above average, but they're not necessarily Bitcoin people. They're looking for a faster, safer browser. They don't like ads, and they, in this case, want to give back. With the basic attention token on Ethereum, we're doing two things. One is we're raising funding for the company. I'll be frank about that. It's the new way to go. I think it's better. It's non-dilutive. The other thing we're doing is we're remonetizing our users. They've been totally excluded from the money flows, like Lily said. They've been sort of looted for their attention, abused. And a lot of them have gone to ad blockers, and Brave is an ad blocker by default. That's our baseline. We don't require you to donate. We don't require you to see ads. We want to get to a world where you can opt into ads and you're paid a revenue share for your attention. If the ads go in a private, user-private ad channel, ad slot, then you get the lion's share of the revenue. No pun on Brave, lion intended. And if we can partner with publishers to be an indirect partner, we can give them a much better revenue share than their current programmatic partners give them, because that world is a mess of too many middle players, arbitrage, fraud risk.
Yeah, I guess speaking from the CoinDesk perspective, when I look at something like micropayments, I think a lot of times in this space, the thought process has really been, we can do micropayments, okay, great, we don't need advertisers anymore. But when you look at the models, advertising really does power a lot of media revenue models. Even an event like this is
$72 billion last year in the US digital ad spend.
Digital ad spend?
Yeah, 160 billion globally, I think.
But I think the interesting thing is, even though ad spend is consistently declining, there's also a stability there because you know that you're going to receive it. Whereas a lot of these early attempts at micropayments, we saw that people just didn't give, or when they were asked to give, we couldn't really get them to incentivize. We couldn't incentivize that action, which sort of gets to the old, I guess, the Nick Szabo problem of the high mental cost of micropayments. And I guess the idea here is that oftentimes if you think about the internet as sort of consumer, creator, advertiser, the advertisers are the people with the most money. So I guess, Josh, I guess I'd throw it over to you. Is there a way to engage advertisers in micropayments, or how do you think about that? Or is it really just going to the users and convincing them to adopt micropayments? We have to get this other party that maybe is already funding the system more involved?
So I don't know if I have an answer, but I have some thoughts on how to approach it. I think there's a tremendous amount of bias in this room, right? I mean, there's probably a few spies in here, but there's a tremendous amount of blockchain bias in the room. And why I bring that up is I think, like for a newspaper, for the Sun-Times or for any IT project, if you will, I think the hardest thing is to be honest. I mean, the hardest thing is to ask oneself, is a blockchain, slash cryptocurrency solution the best, or among the best solutions for my given problem? So then it's, well, okay, what's the problem? And if the problem is monetizing content, the problem is declining revenues, then I think I put up a website. It's not a very good website. My HTML skills stopped at 1.0 in '94. But it's a newspapers plural .rip. Then they've got a newspapers.lol. It's like the new domain names. It resolves fine in Brave and it resolves fine in Chrome. It doesn't work in Safari. I just put some stats up there. So the one problem which I think hasn't been addressed successfully, which I think would work really well with cryptocurrencies, and was talked a little bit in other contexts here. We take a very U.S.-centric view of our content. So Price Waterhouse did a kind of a cross-border content study that I posted on that site, and in many countries, India, Russia, Argentina, pretty much every large country except the U.S., the U.K., and France, they are more interested in news outside of their country than the news inside of their country. So for that, something like a cryptocurrency solution, provided it's somewhat ubiquitous or in the hands of enough people, it's very elegant because the payment mechanisms are so across the world. They're just so heterogeneous. So for that particular problem, I thought that the Sun Times has at 125 years worth of content and photographs and all sorts of stuff that could be valuable to the 6.7 billion people or the 7 billion people that don't live in Chicago. In that instance, I think cryptocurrencies work great. So I think in order to define, you just have to get really kind of specific on what problem you're trying to solve, and then be honest about, is this? And I think in many cases it is, and in many cases it's not the best solution.
So I guess, Lily, what about getting over that hurdle? So you're trying to incentivize people to do tasks and to engage in micropayments. Are you finding more or less success with new users in certain parts of the world? I guess as Josh was sort of alluding to there, is the pain, so I guess is the usability easier to overcome when you have more to gain? And are there a certain select group of users maybe that we don't interact with every day who can get over this threshold with micropayments?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're focused mostly on the sort of skilled world right now, because that's the world that we're starting in. And we've only been at this product for a few months, so it's sort of where we are in the life of this product right now. But we already have a lot of interest from maybe sort of lower skilled and certainly the developing world, right? Really the way we think about it is with micropayments, if you can pay anyone, you can potentially hire anyone. That becomes a pretty powerful idea. Maybe that's something that's less relevant for us in this room because we're pretty skilled and we maybe value our time more than money. But that's not something that's really true for the majority of people in the world, right? So if we can enable anyone to sell a couple of minutes of their time, which is essentially what an email is, someone's asking for a minute or two of your time and your attention, and if you can enable people in sort of, across the world to sell a minute or two of their time doing a task, which could be as simple as image labeling or sort of training machine learning algorithms, then I think what we can eventually create is actually a little bit more of a liquid labor market, and that's something that kind of excites me. So I think that it depends on the use case. For the world that we're in right now, it's more about business contacts and business-related use cases. But I think that as we sort of grow into the adjacent and then beyond that sort of skill sets, then it's not really going to be about that necessarily. It's really going to be about potentially just putting food on the table, right?
But 21 is still working heavily with Bitcoin. And as you see people looking at other models, we have here alternative blockchains. We have alternative blockchains with tokens on top of it. I guess, how do you look at that? Why are you still basing your services on Bitcoin?
Yeah. We're pretty open-minded. We're basing it on Bitcoin right now because Bitcoin is still, no pun intended, but really kind of the gold standard, right? And I think that we'll see what happens. It could evolve very quickly outside of that. And we're certainly not adverse to supporting other coins. It depends on sort of what our user base is interested in and what our future user base is interested in. And we'll see how that goes.
I think another thing that we talked about is that oftentimes when you're talking about changing the way the internet works, it works really well for the end user. I think a lot of the products we use we're familiar with for years. We're trained to go to a website, expect content for free. I guess is just because we can participate in the and earn from that isn't necessarily, is it enough to disrupt our experience? And I guess how have you thought about that, Ryan, in the design of yours? Because I imagine you're dealing with a lot of people who are familiar with things like Reddit, things like social media networks that invest millions in a user experience that makes it comfortable.
Well, first of all, I think it does work all right, but I think that there are problems that are not obvious unless you sort of think it through. So first of all, ads, I think from a consumer point of view, are actually a problem. So I'm not sure I would say that it's working that great. I mean, probably many people, in fact, why don't we just raise hands? How many people in this room use an ad blocker? Probably almost everyone, because we're more sophisticated. There are hundreds of millions of people that use an ad blocker. Of course, there's a browser with a built-in one. I think that what consumers are saying is ads are really annoying. I'm done with this. I'm done with it because I hate looking at them. I'm done with it because they violate my privacy and so on. There are a lot of reasons why ads aren't that good, and this is kind of like it's not obvious, again, unless you think about it, and most people don't notice it because most people don't even realize how irritated they are by looking at these ads. But I actually think it's not as good as it could be for that reason, number one. And number two is I actually think that the curation is nowhere near as good as it could be. I think getting the right content to the right people does not work very well. If Reddit is the best example of curating content, I think we have a long way to go. I think Reddit does a better job than previous systems have done. But I think we're not doing a very good job really nailing getting the excellent high-quality content to the right people. So all of these problems are not obvious unless you think it through and you start working on this stuff. And we'll talk with people who say things like, well, I don't like paywalls because I would never pay for the stuff I see on Reddit. And to me, that's like, well, you know what you're really saying here, because you pay for stuff all the time. You pay for things in the real world that are worth paying for. So what you're saying is the quality of the content you're seeing on Reddit is so bad that it's not even worth paying for. So why are you even spending your time, looking at this content? So that's our thesis here, that it really isn't obvious how bad the situation is, but it's worse than you would think. And I don't mean to diss the internet, because it's greater than it was before, but there's a huge 10x, 100x multiple here that could happen if we solve these problems well.
I guess the counter argument to that would be I don't find ads to be too invasive as a reader. At the end of the day, they're delivering content to me, and I don't have to do anything. So I guess maybe Brendan, I would talk to you about how do you get people to realize a problem that they maybe don't know they have.
So how did we get 3 to 6 speed up on Android, 3 to 7x speed up on iOS? We blocked not just ads, which are visible and sometimes annoying, but the tracking scripts, the programmatic waterfall, all the calls out that happen to get those ads. Those raid your privacy. They run the radio, which is the number 1 or 2 battery consumer on your mobile device after the screen usually, and they cost you data plan. Rob Leathern, using a New York Times study, he's at Facebook now, estimated it's half your data plan if you're tiered. So $23 a month, you're paying for the internet. It's not free. You're paying for the data cost of the tracking scripts as well as the ads that you're loading. If you block those in Brave, you're 3 to 6 times faster on mobile, 2x or more on desktop. That is a better experience. People notice that, and they appreciate it. It's true, when the frog is being boiled slowly over the years, frog doesn't know the frog's about to die. A lot of frogs are jumping out of that boiling pot, getting ad blockers. And it's 600 million users adopting ad blockers globally. It's a big thing by default. I think UC Web was a big browser in Asia, parts of India, and it got bought by Alibaba, and it blocks by default. It's an inspiration to Brave. So I think there's a new set of web standards coming that have to get rid of this chaotic system that evolved on top of the cookie, cross-site image, JavaScript, my fault, was an opportunistic system that led to all this parasitism and arbitrage and this entry points for fraud and malware. If we have a better system of discourse with web standards and blockchain-based cryptocurrencies, I think everyone will be better off. And you don't need to change the world all at once. You just need a few new products to move markets.
That's Lilia, the way I would kind of rephrase that is there, it seems like we're working at the margins right now. We're trying to get the people who are converted to this idea to adopt a new way. How do you gain enough traction with that to really gain a critical mass?
I think you have to make it worthwhile for people. And so, obviously I think that maybe we have a way of doing that where you're potentially getting paid to do something, and so now incentives are aligned, right? Up until now, it has been that we're all sort of the eyeballs that people are trying to grab and track and try to retarget and all those sorts of things. And if you kind of share in the profits of your attention and sort of the value of that, which is incredibly valuable, was it how many billions of dollars of digital advertising out there? So obviously it's all valuable. And if you can incentivize those people and have them sort of participate in the profits and the gains, then I don't know that it's going to entirely replace the existing model, but it can certainly increment it and actually deliver more value, right? Because I would even argue right now, because all you can buy is eyeballs and clicks, what you're buying, what you're paying for on Google with a click is really what you want as a qualified lead. You don't just want a click, but there's no way to tell whether this is a qualified lead click or just someone who's browsing on the internet and sort of hanging out, right? But if there are ways that you can incentivize greater engagement with the people that you're sort of passing by on the internet, then there's potentially a way that you can actually get that person to qualify themselves through the form of a task and actually deliver a much higher value sort of interaction. So I would even argue for existing sort of advertising structures out there, it could still be incremental to that. Yeah.
So I guess I'd kind of round it off. I'd go back to CoinDesk as the example. We have to use ads to monetize right now. We can try different new things, but at the end of the day, advertisers still want to reach our readers through our platform. How should we look as a trusted aggregator of information, again, who wants to unite people around a experience of trust, curating and aggregating things that people want, in this case, information about blockchain. How should we look in this blockchain age? Do these trusted aggregators exist?
Yeah. Okay. Well, sure. I mean, absolutely. I mean, trusted aggregators, curators. I mean, for our product, we look at many different roles. Like, it's not just about creating and consuming content. This is the simplest way of looking at it. But there are a lot of other things you can do. So we look at, for instance, what we call curators. These are people that identify good content and deliver it to the right people. You're curating content, like a curator in a museum or something like that. You can also look at people that moderate content. These are people that are presented with a list of content, and they see something negative or inappropriate or illegal or something of the sort, and so they delete or they remove or they block or they hide content. So, with respect to CoinDesk, I mean, I would think you guys are doing a number of different things, right? I mean, you're creating original content, you're curating content, you have comments, so you're probably also moderating content.
Sure.
You're doing a bunch of different valuable things on your platform. So I would just say, with respect to the ads, I mean, there's nothing. I don't think there's anything intrinsically wrong with ads, but I'm sure as this whole space evolves, as the technology gets more mature, you will explore with and you will supplement with alternative sort of revenue streams and mechanisms that are appropriate for CoinDesk.
So yes, Josh, what does the ideal trusted aggregator or media outlet, the Sun-Times, CoinDesk, what is it going to look like at the end of this vision?
Oh, which vision?
The idea that here we have a new way to bring parties together in the curation of information on the web.
Well, I mean, I think as Brendan was saying, I mean, I think that the more friction that you can reduce from the system, I think the user experience can improve significantly. When you've got 30 to 60% of the data coming into the browser, going out of the browser, being ad network, related stuff. There's a lot of room for improvement. I was gonna say when I go to like Google News, it happens pretty often now, and I tweet about it each when it happens. Like I go to Google News, I look for an article. It's on the New York Times. I click on the article because I want to read it, and then bam, the paywall comes up. It would be awesome, we're not there yet, but it would be awesome if I could just tap a button on the browser, pay 25 cents, pay 10 cents, whatever, read the article, be done with it. Instead, they think we're fools. They think, we don't read the fine print that says you're signing up for $300 a year subscription, but it starts at $4.99 a week or whatever, So I go to another site, or I find somebody, cut and paste the article on another site. That's what happens. So, what it's going to look like in the future, I don't know, but I think there are a lot of specific problems that can be solved one problem at a time with this technology.
Brendan, you're talking to publishers.
We are.
What do the dinosaurs do?
I mean, they're all in trouble, and they are generally slow to change. I'll say there's some that are innovative, like CoinDesk. The best way we could slot it in is as a programmatic ad partner, sort of a supply-side platform, and that's going to take time. So the first thing we'll do with the token is try to pay users directly for ads that go in user private slots, like I mentioned. I do think there are great ideas with the token. You could gift wrap a link. I subscribe to ft.com. I could see a page I like and send it to some friends who don't subscribe, wrap it with a token so they can view it, and their view is paid for. They don't have to be forced through that terrible user interface of that paywall. Maybe they like FT and they'll subscribe later. I think that's one way to break down the barriers.
Lily, any final thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, we even tried something with Consensus and CoinDesk on Sunday night. I think you probably all would have received the email, actually, where Consensus and CoinDesk as a media outlet actually has quite a following, right? So thousands of people come to this conference. And so we actually partnered with CoinDesk to send out an email which contained a paid survey. And so the idea is that it's basically a form of advertising, right? But it's a form of advertising that Consensus or CoinDesk can do over and over again because it doesn't exhaust the readers simply because the readers are actually participating. So that's something that we sort of piloted and we'll do more variations of that for media outlets. But folks have lots of are attention rich but cash poor.
Cool.
Yeah.
Great. I'd like to thank our panelists here. Thank you guys for sticking through the panel, and hope you enjoy the rest of the day.